In today's episode, I'm joined by Donna Johnston, and we are talking about how leadership development is changing. Donna, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Donna, could you start us off by just giving us a potted history of your career to date?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started at HSBC many years ago, working in a branch network, counting cash on the counter.
Yeah.
So how long ago that was. From there, moved through various parts of HSBC. Then I joined professional services, where I was out for many years, well over a decade. Then from there, I moved into tobacco industry, then into the food industry, and then I went back. So various different organisations in various different roles, mainly in talent and learning in the last 20 years.
Yeah, fantastic. And how has, I know, big question, we'll start broad and then we'll narrow down, but how has leadership development changed in the last 20 years?
I think elements have it. I think if we look back to 20 years ago, it was very much get people in a classroom. Let's take them away from the office for 2-3 weeks and let's tell them how to be good leaders. I think what's changed now is that with technology, the speed of change, it's not just looking at the technical ability, but it's also looking at much more of the whole person. And I think also it's very much focusing on, well, the way I look at it, is that leadership development is not just about sitting in a classroom. It's about how does leadership development drive the performance of the organisation. So for me, every time we're talking about leadership development, we should be talking about organisational performance, on how we're moving the needle on our strategy. So what does that look like in terms of our leadership? I think the other piece that comes into it as well is a diversity element. Yes. If you think about the number of generations we've got in the organisation, I think it's the first time we've probably had, 5 generations in an organisation. Yeah. How do you meet all of that need? That comes through being diverse, through being inclusive. So I think the old traditional way of what was 20 years ago, the leadership development that I went through, for example, is completely different. And then also if we think about talent, what do we mean by talent? Are we saying just a selected few are talent? Or are we saying everybody's talent? So again, I think even some of the words that we use around talent is changing. And also, I think the other focus is speed. Our world has speeded up due to technology. Yes. So how do we really think about learning through the lens of speed to competence? And what do we mean by speed of competence? It's no longer, you no longer can't wait 6 months to get up to speed in a new job, for example. So how do we really how do we help people move faster in line with our business? But it should always be linked to performance.
Absolutely. I really like that link to organisational performance, organisational outcomes, because if it doesn't actually impact on that, it's almost like, well, what's the point in doing it?
What's the point in? Well, it's like with learning development, isn't it? If it's not seen as a commercial part of the business, then what's the point? Because for me, it should be about driving impact and outcomes. I mean, if I think of some of the leadership development that I was doing 15 years ago, we were asking them to work on a business problem. And coming up with recommendations to change the performance in the organisation. Yeah. So I was looking at about 15 years ago, where when I think about some of the leadership development I did in my first manager role, I was sent off-site to a really beautiful university doing a treasure hunt in the cold. What is that doing?
How is that linked?
Exactly.
Organisational performance.
Yeah. So for me, it's all about how we're moving the dial, if you like, and always linking it back to performance.
I also think your comment there on talent, what is talent? Is it a small, select few, high potential talent, or is it everyone? What's the answer, do you think, to that question?
I think it depends on how you look at it, because I think, say, for example, there's a particular and this is where skills comes in as well, right? Because if you know that within your organisation that you've got your 3-year plan or 5-year plan, and you know what organisational capability you need to shift the organisation over that period of time, you then you're looking then further down and thinking, actually, do we have that skill set within the organisation? Are we going to buy it in? Are we going to upskill people? There's also that piece that's linking back into your question about talent is, do you have good succession planning for those key roles that make the big difference in the organisation? Do you define that as talent? Or do you think, right, I'm going to have a skills-based organisation where we're moving the skill set right across the organisation because we're looking 3 to 5 years ahead with the skills, so we're moving the needle that way. So I think it all depends on how you look at talent and how you define it.
Is the answer both?
Yes.
Yeah, you need to do both of those things. Yeah, interesting. You talked about speed as being I guess a challenge of today, the speed at which we need to learn, onboard, develop. What would you say are the other kind of biggest challenges facing leaders and leadership development teams today?
Complexity. I think if you look at the world that we live in today, it's very complex. I think if you think about the way that we might have communicated or marketed 5 years ago is different today, right? If you look at the new generation of leaders that are coming in, how they expect everything, quite rightly so, at the fingertips. If you think about social media, it's all there, it's available. If you're thinking about learning, leadership development, skills, it should be there, easily accessible at the time of need. In a simple and pragmatic way. Otherwise, you do what I do, just go look on YouTube or Google. So,
the thing that is accessible.
Absolutely. So the way that we do business in learning development, whether it's leadership development or wherever it may be, is changing. And I'm not sure that L&D has caught up with where it needs to be.
Interesting. So how do we solve for that?
I think there's various elements of it. I think delivering what we've already got is not going to work anymore. I think if we look at the old competency models, it's a tick in the box. Oh, if we do that, we tick it, we've achieved what we want. No, we haven't. It's like if you put learning development on a desert island and it still survives with no oxygen, you need to be asking yourself some serious questions, right? I mean, for me, it's about how are we driving those skills? I think you can no longer just think about having an LXP and that'll meet your need. Of course it won't. It's about what are the different types of technology and how are you really driving AI enablement. So what I mean by that is if I'm wanting to do leadership development, I want it personalised again. What my skill set is, what I've got today, whether it's that using adaptive learning to ask me questions, to personalise it, whatever it may be. I want learning that's personalised, that's going to move the needle for me. For my own growth. I want to be able to self-serve myself, to look at the skills that I need to be. I want to be able to look at across the organisation to see what other roles are going, what skills I need to meet to be able to get to that, what are the people in leadership skills that I need. So for me, it's about being really clear about your leadership architecture in the organisation as well. And also there's a piece of me about how do I self-serve? Because I want everything at my fingertips. But there's also that piece of, if we're looking at the strategically, what do we want our leaders to be in our organisation? And what does that look and feel like? So I think there's the top down, but there's also that bottom up piece as well.
Absolutely. Personalisation is a word I'm hearing more and more and more and more. I think we expect it in our everyday lives as consumers. When we're on our phones, on social media, etc., we're so used to life being personalised for us. So we absolutely expect that in our working world as well, and our development activities. How far away are most organisations from being personalised in terms of their offering?
I think it depends on what are they looking at technology in the right way for me, because I think that the old world of the big LMSs and the big LXPs, it's no longer hitting the mark anymore, is it? I think that I think the future is probably going to be lots of technology or working with organisations that see you as a strategic partner.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I look at some of the LXPs that I've seen in an organisation, we don't personalise it for us, for our workforce, for what we're trying to drive. So, for me, I think AI is one of the most amazing things that's coming in.
Yeah.
Because by using that and using the technology that's there, it's going to understand people's personal styles, what they're interested in, because it's going to remember.
Yeah.
It's that kind of piece that's really going to drive a personalisation of learning. And I think that there's some organisations that are a long way from it.
Yeah, agree. It's interesting what you say there around the future probably isn't one piece of technology that says it's got the bells and whistles. And I wonder actually if a lot of organisations still think that could be possible and are maybe searching for a bit of a unicorn in that respect. And the reality is that it's the future is probably going to be plugging together different pieces of technology that all do different things to then ensure you have got genuine personalisation.
Let me give you another example, Hannah. If we think about, I think about some of the organisations I've worked in, and I look at a lot of LXPs. Doesn't even take learning content from other providers and translate it. So if I'm sat in a market in Timbuktu, what's the point in me only having learning that's in English?
Yeah.
We know that we've got the technology that can accurately translate learning with 98% accuracy.
Yeah.
Why are we not integrating some of that?
Yeah.
To me, that is one simple element of where you're able to meet everybody's need.
Absolutely.
In all different parts of the world.
Yeah.
And make it accessible.
Yes, 100%. What's your view on AI coaching?
It's quite interesting because when I did my PhD, I worked with somebody that did a whole, really interesting, study on AI coaching.
Yeah.
And if there was a difference between that and personalised coaching.
What did they find?
And it was really fascinating. What became evident is that people went to a point that they would share certain personal information because they felt safe to do so.
Yeah.
But then it would only go to a point. You didn't get that deep connection.
With the AI.
Absolutely, yes, with the AI. So you didn't get that deep connection of what you get with a person.
Interesting.
So that was quite interesting. So I think for me, I think AI coaching absolutely has a point. So I wonder, and again, I'm thinking out loud here, when we're using AI coaching, do we say that we offer that to everybody in an organisation, for example, so everybody feels that they've got access to something if it's intelligent enough.
Yeah.
And then and it learns and it adapts because the information it's taken in, it remembers and then do we say you have other types of coaching, personalised coaching, for other elements in the organisation, whether it's particular types of developing talent, depending on what you call talent, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So I think it's absolutely got a role, and I think we can be really selective how we use it.
Absolutely. So the two things can kind of complement each other, really. Do you think it's possible to use person coaching and AI coaching together within the same program? So, for example, you might start off with an AI and then move to a person once you've got to a certain level. Or maybe it reduces the need to meet with the person so regularly and you do a bit of AI in the middle. Do you think it's possible to mix the two methodologies in that way?
Absolutely. Because I think as well, and I think eventually, is there going to be a lot of difference between AI coaching and a bot? Because as bots are becoming more intelligent, it's going to be there and available anyway, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely. Interesting. And we've talked a bit about technology. What about assessment? How does assessment play into leadership development?
it's critical, I think. And I think it's critical for everybody because I'm just thinking, I guess, where I've used Savile. So whichever organisation, if you know, I've brought it into quite a few organisations. So for me, I guess I'm thinking what I like particularly about Savile is when you do the 360, and I know that gives you a snapshot in time, but it gives you some really rich data to work with. But what I like about the Savile is the fact that you can overlay the personality element of it. And what I really like is I always bring that into coaching, particularly executive coaching, because actually if somebody's getting feedback in a particular area, but it's a sticky point in the personality, and the personality doesn't naturally gravitate towards that. Are you going to focus on that development area if it's going to take a lot more out of that person from an energetic perspective, or are you going to move the needle on the area where they're really good at performing and it matches their personality and you get an extra 50% rather than the 5% on the development area. So for me, I really like the fact that you can overlay the personality and the preferences with people's perceptions, because I think that brings a real richness. And then when you're embedding that into coaching, and then you can go back and do another assessment, whether it's 9 months, year later, whenever you choose to do it, you can start to see the growth in that person.
Absolutely.
I think the other element is if we're thinking about graduates, the coaching report. It's so easy, it's scalable. But it's bringing it alive for graduates simple, at that level. Absolutely. So I think there's so many different tools out there. I think it's making sure that we're using the right tool for the right thing at the right time.
Absolutely.
So yes, I think it does. And do you know what, Hannah? I think anything that raises that level of self-awareness can only be a good thing, right?
Oh, 100%. Couldn't agree more. Donna, we both know that not all assessments are created equal. What do you think talent teams sometimes get wrong when choosing assessment or using assessment?
I think sometimes the complexity. For me, is how do you align it with the organisation? So for me, it's each organisation have different behaviours or different values, whatever they choose to use. Are they making sure it's the right tool that's able to do that?
And kind of walk and talk the organisational language.
Absolutely. Otherwise, it's just another assessment. What's the point? Where's it adding value to me in my role?
People just don't engage with it
absolutely
as much.
I mean, I've done so many assessments over the year, and it's great when you have your session, you think, that's good information. I don't pick it up again.
And you don't use it.
However, if it's looking at my potential in the organisation, so for example, what we've done with your tool many times over is look, what are the people skills or the leadership skills or the business skills or whatever we may be, and how do we translate that into the personalisation report? So for me, I think the key thing that a lot of people don't do, they don't personalise it to the organisation, and it becomes just another tool. But you might not. Great when you get it, but how am I really embedding that? How am I thinking about that differently? How am I integrating that into my career? How am I integrating that into my role? How am I integrating that into me as a leader of other people?
So it's actually by making sure you link the tool that you're using and map it back to your own organisational frameworks. Actually, what that does is it helps people get that so what. It helps people link back to business performance, organisational outcomes, those sorts of things. And therefore you get better return on investment.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, what's the point?
Indeed, quite right. Donna, skills, we've mentioned them a little bit, but I'd quite like to just dive into that a little bit more. Skills, I think, has become a really hot topic over the last few years. Lots and lots of organisations are pivoting to skills. What does this mean at leadership level?
So I think for me, and this is quite interesting, isn't it? Because I've been to quite a few conferences where there's been people from HR, and we talk about skills, but we actually mean competencies. So what we're trying to do is talk about skill, and then really we're talking about competencies. Two different things. I know competency frameworks don't work. We've been talking about competency frameworks forever.
Yeah.
Do you see the needle where they move an organisation? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So I think for me, when I'm thinking about skills and I'm thinking about leadership skills, I think for me, if we're thinking about the organisation, we need to be really clear what's the leadership architecture. So what are the levels that we're going after and why, and what's the impact that's going to have. Then there's a piece for me is where we're being really clear about what those skills mean for each leadership level.
And is that what they look like?
Absolutely.
In terms of what you would observe?
Absolutely. Yeah. Are you wanting me to be an agile leader, for example? I don't know, I'm just making this up.
Yeah.
But, and again, it should be linked into where the organisation is wanting to go.
Yes.
So when I've looked at skills before, wherever I've been, and to do with competencies, to be fair, it's what does that look like 3 to 5 years ahead?
Yes.
Because you should be using those skills to drive the culture and to drive the skill set in the organisation. But it also gives you an idea of, do I need to buy it in? But it's also making sure, am I developing people? But again, if we're looking at key skills, back to the assessment piece, it should start with TA. You're looking at the talent element of it. You're looking at the development area of it. So for me, it's that whole end-to-end piece. I don't think you can look at it in silos. So if you're looking at leadership skills, I think it's really clear about what that looks like across your leadership architecture, whether it's 3 levels, 4 levels, whatever you choose to be. And then also, I think, for me, it's not looking at every skill for everything, because it becomes another animal of competencies. For me, it's looking against clusters of roles within that leadership architecture. Not every role, because roles are changing over time. So let's be pragmatic and real about it. It's also, what are the key non-negotiable skills that you're trying to drive in the organisation? Not every skill for every role. Otherwise, you're getting another tick in the box exercise. For me, it's what are the roles that are driving the organisation? What are the non-negotiable skills that are in those roles that's going to drive the organisation? And then for me, if we're thinking of leadership skills, is what learning then sits on the back of that skill.
Yes, indeed. So what impact does this pivot to skills, I guess, if any, have on leadership development activity?
Sorry, say that again?
So thinking about skills and a lot of organisations pivoting to skills, does that have an impact on leadership development activity?
Absolutely.
And what does that look like?
Because if you've not defined what skills you want in your organisation for your leadership population, then where's your benchmark? How do you know what good looks like? How do you know where you want to shift the organisation? How do you know what a good leader looks like? You know, I think, again, if we think about L&D, we talk about it, and we have this really great language, HR language. But what does that mean in business terms?
Yeah, absolutely.
And at that, so that's where we need to be really focusing on. So what skills are going to drive the performance in the organisation for our leaders? That's a conversation we should be having.
Absolutely. And I wonder if one of the reasons skills has become so popular is because just the language is so much simpler than competencies.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, if I'm upskilling myself and I'm owning my own development and I'm owning my own learning, which is what a lot of the generations are now doing because they've had everything at touch of a button. Can you imagine how powerful that can be if you've got the right learning against the right skill at the right time when I want to upskill myself?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I wonder if that also links to, you touched on it briefly, this idea of systemic HR, a need to break down silos. And again, having lots of conversations on this at the moment, I feel there's a real desire in many places to break down those silos for talent acquisition, to start working much more closely with talent development, sharing data. I think what tends to happen is talent acquisition gathers all this lovely assessment data, as an example, during a recruitment, and then it just sits there. And imagine the value that could be squeezed out of it if actually it was then picked up for onboarding, talent development, etc., etc.
And I wonder, and I'm thinking out loud here now, I wonder if some of that fits into your iPlatform that you've got, where you're talking about teams.
Yeah.
If all of that data is fed into there, you start to get a real nice picture of your organisation.
Yeah.
And that's when you can start looking at work role reports, for example.
Yes.
So
yes.
I think that if people start, because when I think about every time I've brought you into which organisations I'm in, it's always been looking at it holistically. How does it all fit in? Because for me, you should be looking at the whole employee life cycle, not just a small element of it. Otherwise, it becomes like any other report. Oh, we'll just do it when you join. Oh, you're a good fit. Oh, that's great. But actually, what's the ongoing development? And where is the organisational shifting? If you brought in new behaviours or values, that is that, are there still potential? What development are we looking at?
How does that change?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What do you think are the biggest blockers to organisations achieving that sort of systemic HR model?
I think there's various elements to this. I think some of it is because people are so busy. It's very easy to stick to your silos. I think that's an element of it. I think another piece is technology and having the access to that information. I think the other piece is that people might not know. I think some of it is education, and then I think the other piece is there's always that piece of, if you share with me the impact and outcomes and what good looks like, if everything joined together, I think people will be much more on board because they understand it.
Yes.
I think some of it is around that communication and people genuinely not knowing, and the technology, and being able to do it at speed.
And it falls down the priority list because people are too busy. The technology, I think, is a really interesting one, because I think that can sometimes feel like the hardest part. And I wonder whether, or what your view would be on how good generally are HR folk at really pushing tech hard and working through those difficult problems to get bits of technology integrated and working together? Or do you think it often maybe goes into the too difficult box where it shouldn't? I think
elements of that, yes, but also how many organisations, a lot of the organisations I've worked in, it's like, well, this HRIS will fix everything.
Yes.
So that you buy this big HRIS system that looks at HR, looks at TA, looks at learning, but it's not great at everything.
Yeah.
It gives you the bare minimum, in my view. And this is where I was back to earlier, is it's probably more pieces of technology, but thinking how it all links together.
Yeah, so find the bits of technology that are brilliant at doing the thing that they do.
Absolutely.
And then link it all up.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Donna, what would be your 3 top tips for anyone working in leadership development today?
3 top tips. I mean, for me, I think it's really trying to think about if you, and this is just some of the areas that I've been thinking about, is if there's a gap in the organisation or that needs to be filled, a problem statement, a challenge, whatever you want to call it, why would you not have your leadership development focus on some of that? To look at how you fix some of that problem, or if there's an area you're wanting to grow the organisation, whatever it may be, why would you not have what you call your talent or your leadership looking at that so that you're really bringing it alive? So it's really linked into that performance element.
Yeah.
That would be one of the areas.
And solving real business, learning by solving real business
problem.
Yeah.
That would be the first thing. The second thing is being really clear about what your architecture is of leadership. So how are you splitting what does leadership mean in your organisation? What are the levels, whatever it may be, what does that look like?
So it's setting expectations.
Absolutely, yeah. And then the third piece would be for me, and this is where your skills and the assessment comes together, because for me, it's been really clear, what do you mean by a leader in your organisation? What are the skills that would go against that? How does your behaviours or values feed into the assessment? And then how do you know that you're moving the needle? Because that is through the assessments, right? Yeah. And I think the other piece for me that threads through all of that is moving away from this old-fashioned model that we take everybody out, and then we're going to have 10 days of intensive learning, and they're going to walk out that door and they're going to become these amazing leaders. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
So for me, it's looking at a longer term journey. It might be that you have a leadership journey that lasts 18 months or 2 years or whatever it may be. It might be you take chunks of it. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's being open and thinking, what could that possibly look like? And maybe that it's actually the learner that decides how long that is.
Yeah, indeed. And in fact, you said at the very beginning, some of your own leadership development experiences 20 years ago, where you were doing treasure hunts in a field, which perhaps didn't feel like it had as good an impact as some of the stuff that would be done now. I wonder actually if that is all you've ever done, a bit of leadership development 20 years ago doing a treasure hunt in a field, why not carry on and continuously learn and develop, do the things now that we know work, but then in 10 years' time, it might look very different. Absolutely. Is there something there around that continuous learning piece?
Absolutely, but aren't we learning every day? I'm learning in this moment from you, right?
And me from you.
We're learning all the time.
Yeah.
I think it's just been really clear and concise and choiceful and purposeful about what do we mean by leadership in this organisation and what does that look like? And I think some of that as well, my view is before you even start to look at leadership development, it's about understanding from leaders on the ground, what does it mean to them? And really aligning what you're looking at. So you're really understanding what that problem statement is.
Yeah.
What the goal is. What does good look like in terms of the impact and outcomes, and what's the solution?
Yeah.
What's the problem that you're trying to solve, if you like?
Yeah.
So for me, that is where the focus should be. So it's really driving that performance, not just creating something for 5 days because it looks good.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm just going to summarise your 3 top tips there, because I feel like I took us off on a bit of a tangent at the end. So, number 1, if there's a gap to fill, a problem to solve, why not use that as part of leadership development and get folk on a programme to have a look and try and solve that problem. Secondly, get your architecture right. Looking at different levels. What does that look like? What's required? And then there's that third bit around making sure you have that benchmark of in terms of moving the needle. Have I summarised that fairly?
Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. Donna, it's been an absolute pleasure, as always. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed today's episode of The Deep Dive. If you have, please remember to like and subscribe to stay tuned for all our latest content. If you want more information on any of the topics you've heard today, check out the show notes for case studies, resources and articles. I've been Hannah Mullaney. See you next time on The Deep Dive.